Jacob and Isabella Carter seemed like the perfect couple until one vanished without a trace and the other tried to rewrite reality with blood lies and a forged passport. Jacob and Isabella Carter were the kind of couple people envied. Living in the heart of Miami, their lives appeared glamorous, effortless, and full of love. Jacob, tall and charismatic, owned a string of upscale fitness centers across Florida. He often appeared in lifestyle magazines, praised for his entrepreneurial success and seemingly perfect marriage. Isabella, his stunning wife, had once walked runways in New York and Milan before shifting her focus to lifestyle blogging and influencing. Her Instagram feed showcased designer outfits, luxury vacations, candlelit dinners, and behind-the-scenes shots of their flawless life together. From the outside, it looked like the Carters had it all. They lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows and white marble floors. Isabella often shared sunset views from their balcony, captioned with inspirational quotes about love and success. Their followers admired them, wishing for even a glimpse of that kind of life. But no one knew what was really going on behind those tinted glass doors. Despite the smiles and luxury, cracks had started to appear. Friends who visited often noticed a tension between them. Isabella would flinch when Jacob raised his voice, and she had started turning down invitations for brunch or spa weekends, things she used to enjoy. Some friends suspected burnout or stress from work, while others whispered that maybe Jacob's charm was only surface deep. But no one had proof of anything more serious. Isabella rarely spoke about personal matters and always defended Jacob if someone hinted at anything troubling. At business events, Jacob maintained his charismatic presence, shaking hands and giving motivational talks. But he became more controlling over time, especially about Isabella's online presence. He would suggest which photos she should post, what she should wear, and even which brand deals she should accept. She laughed it off in public, calling him particular, but privately she began to feel trapped. Her tone and captions grew more formal, her posts less frequent, and the joy that once radiated from her images seemed to fade. Their staff noticed changes too. The housekeeper mentioned that Isabella had begun sleeping in the guest room. Their driver recalled late-night arguments that ended with slamming doors. Isabella's sister, living in New York, said their weekly calls had become monthly, and even then Isabella sounded distracted and distant. Then came the announcement that shocked everyone. Jacob and Isabella were leaving the United States. In a brief social media post, Jacob shared that they were moving to Spain for a fresh start and new business opportunities. No mention of when they'd return or what had prompted the sudden change. Friends were stunned. There had been no farewell parties, no goodbyes, and Isabella hadn't said anything to her closest companion. Within a week, their Miami penthouse was listed for sale. Their gyms were transferred to new management, and the Carters vanished from the city's social scene. Jacob kept sharing updates from Spain, a villa by the sea, vineyards, and photos of local cuisine. But Isabella had gone completely silent. Not a single post, story, or appearance. Her silence was the first clue that something was very wrong. When Jacob and Isabella landed in Marbella, Spain, everything seemed like a spontaneous adventure. Marbella, a coastal city on the Costa del Sol, was known for its picturesque beaches, luxury villas, and elite crowd. Jacob had leased a modern whitewashed villa perched on a hillside, complete with a private pool, ocean views, and gated privacy. He presented the move as a romantic escape from the chaos of Miami, a way to start over, away from the pressure of business and the glare of social media. But for Isabella, the transition wasn't as smooth as the curated photos suggested. The villa felt isolated. The neighbors were mostly seasonal tourists or wealthy expats who kept to themselves. She didn't speak Spanish and had no friends nearby. Jacob insisted they didn't need anyone else, claiming the move was about reconnecting and focusing on their relationship. He had already enrolled in a local real estate seminar and spoke about launching a property investment company in Spain. Isabella, however, didn't seem excited. According to locals who met her briefly, she looked tired, distracted, and uncharacteristically quiet. She stopped updating her social media altogether. Her last post, A throwback photo from Miami, with a vague caption about letting go and moving forward, left her followers confused. Messages began to pour in. "Are you okay? Why the silence? Where are you now?" But there were no replies. In contrast, Jacob became even more active online. He shared sunlit photos of the villa, beach walks, and fine dining. One image in particular stood out. Jacob standing alone at a cliffside lookout, arms crossed, staring out at the Mediterranean. The caption read, "Peace. Finally." It didn't mention Isabella. The locals in Marbella had little interaction with the couple. The housekeeper, hired part-time, mentioned that she had only seen Isabella once. She described her as looking withdrawn, barely making eye contact and speaking in a soft voice. Most of the time, it was Jacob who answered the door, gave instructions, and dismissed the staff early. He told one neighbor that Isabella was taking a personal retreat, trying to disconnect from everything. He mentioned Ibiza, a popular wellness destination, claiming she had gone there alone to reset. But no one could confirm that. There were no plane tickets, no ferry rides booked in her name. No hotels or retreats in Ibiza had her on record. Even more strangely, her phone number was no longer active. Calls went directly to voicemail, and her email had been disabled. Back in Miami, Isabella's family grew increasingly concerned. Her sister tried to reach out to Jacob, but he brushed her off, saying Isabella needed space. When she asked for an address to send a letter or gift, Jacob said they were moving villas and didn't have a permanent location yet. Behind Jacob's calm demeanor, things were becoming more suspicious by the day. His sudden enthusiasm for isolation, his control over communications, and Isabella's complete disappearance from both the real world and digital space began to raise alarms, but no one knew just how deep the deception would go, or how dangerous it had already become. By the third week of July, Isabella's absence had become impossible to ignore. Friends who once saw daily updates on her social media now scrolled through an empty timeline. Her Instagram feed, once filled with sunlit photos and uplifting captions, had gone completely silent. Not a single story, post, or even comment had appeared in over 20 days. For someone as active online as Isabella, this sudden disappearance felt unnatural. Her followers began leaving comments under her last post, asking if she was okay. Many were confused, others were worried, but no one had any real answers. In Miami, Isabella's sister, Elena, had grown increasingly anxious. She had reached out multiple times by phone and email, but everything bounced back or went unanswered. At first, she thought it was just a technical issue or perhaps a sign that Isabella really was trying to unplug. But the longer the silence stretched, the more her worry turned into fear. Elena tried contacting Jacob, but his responses were brief and dismissive. He told her Isabella had gone on a private wellness retreat in Ibiza and wasn't using her phone. When pressed for details, like the name of the retreat or a contact number, Jacob brushed her off, claiming he didn't have all the information. He insisted that Isabella was fine and would return soon. Elena wasn't convinced. She began digging. With the help of a friend in the travel industry, she checked ferry logs and local resort records in Ibiza. There was no sign of Isabella, no bookings, no check-ins, no activity. Her name didn't appear on any passenger lists or wellness center rosters. The friend also checked flights from Malaga and nearby airports. Again, nothing. Isabella hadn't left Marbella. That's when Elena contacted the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, voicing her concerns and requesting help in locating her sister. Spanish authorities were alerted and agreed to make a welfare visit to the Carter's villa. When police arrived, Jacob greeted them calmly. He told them the same story. Isabella had left for Ibiza after a disagreement. He said she needed space and had promised to return once she felt better. He handed over her passport as proof she was gone, and mentioned she had taken cash to avoid using her credit cards. The officers found his explanation unusual, but not illegal. Still, they took note of the villa's condition. It was immaculately clean, almost too clean. There were no female toiletries in the bathroom, no clothes in the closet that seemed used. Everything looked staged, or recently arranged. Later that evening, police requested security footage from the gated community's main entrance. That footage showed Jacob coming and going regularly in his luxury SUV. But there was no evidence of Isabella leaving on foot or by vehicle during the time frame Jacob claimed. Her last confirmed appearance on camera was 10 days earlier, walking slowly from the patio into the house. After that, nothing. She had seemingly vanished inside the villa. With no digital trail, no official travel records, and no public sightings, the mystery deepened. Isabella wasn't just missing, she had disappeared without a trace. The welfare check by Spanish authorities had raised eyebrows, but it wasn't until they returned for a more thorough search that the situation began to shift from puzzling to deeply disturbing. With the growing suspicion that Isabella Carter had not simply walked away from her life, investigators secured a warrant to examine the villa more closely. It was early morning when they arrived unannounced, catching Jacob off guard. He tried to maintain his composure, repeating his earlier statements that Isabella had left voluntarily and would return when she was ready. But the officers had stopped believing him. They started their search inside the house. Every room appeared tidy and sterile, with surfaces wiped clean and closets barely stocked. For a couple supposedly living there full-time, the home felt oddly uninhabited. In the bedroom, police noticed only male clothing hanging in the wardrobe. The bathroom drawers were empty, save for a few unopened toiletry bottles. Even in the kitchen, there were no signs of regular cooking. No dishes in the sink, no food in the fridge apart from bottled water and a few takeaway containers. It was as if Isabella had been erased from the house entirely. But it was the backyard that drew their attention. Behind the villa, a small garden area extended toward a low stone wall bordering a narrow patch of woods. It looked peaceful at first glance, but one officer noticed a faint discoloration on the paving stones near a shed, something that looked like it had been scrubbed aggressively. A forensics team was called in to perform a chemical analysis. When they applied luminol, the tiles glowed in a familiar pattern. Blood. Someone had tried to clean it, but the traces remained. Investigators focused their attention on the shed next. Inside, they found yard tools, gloves, and a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner tucked behind a shelf. More alarmingly, they discovered a small roll of duct tape and a pair of women's sandals that appeared out of place. The sandals were later identified by Isabella's sister as a pair she had worn during her last visit to Miami. Police questioned Jacob again. This time, his story started to shift. He now claimed that Isabella had become mentally unstable in the weeks before she disappeared, and may have harmed herself. He hinted that she might have taken her own life somewhere nearby, but offered no real explanation for the blood. Investigators were unconvinced. His inconsistent timeline, evasive answers, and lack of concern raised red flags. At this point, authorities considered Jacob a person of interest. They confiscated his phone and laptop, sending them for forensic analysis. What they found there added to the suspicion. Deleted text conversations between Jacob and a Miami lawyer discussing property transfers, hidden folders containing financial spreadsheets, and recent searches like how to delete GPS history permanently and can bleach remove all traces of blood. Jacob had underestimated the digital footprints he was leaving behind. The investigation, once slow-moving, was now accelerating. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. There were signs of violence, deception, and a possible cover-up. And yet, Isabella's body was still missing, and Jacob continued to deny any involvement. But authorities knew that somewhere on that property or close by lay the truth. 3 days after the forensic sweep of the villa, the case took a dark and undeniable turn. 2 hikers exploring a rugged trail outside Marbella stumbled upon a strange sight near a dry creek bed. Something was half buried under rocks and dirt, barely visible through the underbrush. At first they thought it was trash, maybe a discarded suitcase someone had dumped illegally. But as they got closer, the foul odor and weight of dread became unmistakable. It wasn't just an abandoned item, it was evidence of something sinister. The hikers immediately contacted local authorities. Within hours, the area was sealed off, with crime scene tape. The suitcase was carefully excavated and transported to a secure forensic lab. When investigators opened it, what they found confirmed their worst fears. Inside were blood-stained towels, women's clothing, a crushed smartphone, and a few personal items including a silver necklace with the initials IC. It didn't take long for Isabella's sister to confirm that the necklace had belonged to her. She had gifted it to Isabella on her 30th birthday, and Isabella wore it nearly every day. Although the suitcase didn't contain a body, the contents painted a chilling picture. Forensic tests confirmed that the blood matched Isabella's. The towels were soaked, and some of the clothing had tears and signs of a struggle. The broken phone appeared to have been deliberately smashed. A small clump of long brown hair was found tangled in one of the garments, consistent with Isabella's description. Police immediately redirected their search efforts to the surrounding area. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and aerial drones scanned the rough terrain. Investigators believed that Jacob had tried to scatter or relocate evidence, perhaps to mislead or delay their efforts. The discovery of the suitcase gave them a radius to focus on, a starting point in what they feared would become a body recovery operation. Back at the villa, Jacob was informed of the discovery. His reaction was strangely calm. He expressed vague confusion, suggested the suitcase might have been stolen from the house, and denied knowing anything about it. But the forensic evidence was mounting. Fibers from the villa's carpet were found on the clothing inside the suitcase. The duct tape from the garden shed was an exact match to tape found wrapped around one of the towel bundles. Even the suitcase itself, a designer brand, had appeared in one of Isabella's older Instagram posts, clearly shown in a photo from their Miami apartment. The media caught wind of the discovery and began reporting it internationally. Headlines speculated about murder, betrayal, and a wealthy husband hiding a dark secret. Public opinion turned quickly against Jacob. The polished entrepreneur now appeared as a cold, calculating figure who might have plotted his wife's disappearance in plain sight. What had once looked like a simple missing persons case had officially turned into a homicide investigation, and with the discovery of the suitcase, Jacob Carter was no longer just a person of interest. He was now the prime suspect in what was rapidly becoming one of Spain's most chilling modern crimes. As news of the suitcase discovery spread, the case crossed international lines. Since both Jacob and Isabella were American citizens and the crime potentially involved premeditated acts that began in the United States, the FBI officially joined the investigation. Spanish authorities welcomed the collaboration. What had started as a local missing person case was now an international murder probe, and it was clear that Jacob Carter had been planning far more than a simple move abroad. FBI agents, based at the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, began reviewing Jacob's financial records, travel history, and digital communications. What they uncovered painted a far more disturbing picture than anyone had expected. 3 months before the couple's sudden move to Spain, Jacob had quietly taken out a $2.5 million life insurance policy on Isabella. The policy, which listed Jacob as the sole beneficiary, was finalized just 10 days before they sold their Miami penthouse. Even more suspicious, Jacob had increased the coverage amount twice in a single month without informing Isabella's family or even her closest friends. Investigators also examined his internet search history and device activity in the weeks leading up to their departure from Florida. The findings were damning. From his office desktop, Jacob had conducted searches that included phrases like "how to disappear abroad," "countries with no extradition," and "how to erase digital footprints." He had also browsed forums discussing life insurance payout processes in the event of an overseas death. On the surface, Jacob maintained the image of a man seeking a fresh start, but behind closed doors he was building a roadmap to vanish without consequences. Phone records revealed even more. In the days leading up to Isabella's disappearance, Jacob had made several encrypted calls using secondary burner phones. Those calls were traced to anonymous financial consultants and offshore banking agents. Large wire transfers had been made from joint accounts into new accounts opened under a fake company name registered in Belize. Jacob had gone to great lengths to hide these transactions, even using cryptocurrency to further distance himself from the trail of money. Spanish police, with FBI coordination, obtained surveillance footage from nearby businesses in Marbella. One clip showed Jacob driving alone late at night in the direction of the forested area where the suitcase was eventually found. He returned hours later, looking disheveled and appearing to discard something in a roadside bin, later revealed to be a pair of gloves and a plastic tarp. Faced with mounting evidence, Jacob became increasingly erratic. He stopped cooperating with investigators and refused further interviews. Meanwhile, his legal team began scrambling to prepare a defense, claiming the case was built on circumstantial evidence, but the pattern was too clear. The sudden move, the financial preparation, the staged disappearance, and the elaborate cover-up. With the FBI involved, Jacob's attempt to stay ahead of the investigation was failing. His carefully constructed lies were beginning to collapse under the weight of digital footprints, financial records, and forensic science. For the first time, even his most loyal defenders began to doubt his innocence. The image of a grieving husband was being replaced by something colder, something far more calculated and sinister. As the investigation intensified, Jacob Carter's once calm and confident demeanor began to crumble. The man who had once appeared poised and articulate was now unraveling under pressure. Though he had avoided arrest so far, he was now under constant surveillance. Spanish authorities, working alongside the FBI, monitored his every move, suspecting he might attempt to flee. And they were right to be cautious, because Jacob had already begun putting his escape plan into motion. Authorities discovered that shortly after the suitcase was found, Jacob made contact with a private charter company in Malaga, inquiring about last-minute international flights. Using one of his offshore accounts, he wired a hefty deposit under a false name, Brandon Lee, and requested a private jet to be on standby within a week. He also arranged for a forged passport and ID to be delivered to a P.O. box in a nearby town. He was no longer trying to out-talk the investigation, he was trying to vanish. Despite his calculated efforts, Jacob made a critical mistake. The FBI's cyber unit had flagged one of his burner phones and were actively tracing any outgoing communication. When he made a call to the charter company to confirm his flight, it triggered an alert. Agents immediately informed Spanish police, and the manhunt began. Knowing he was likely to bolt, officers prepared to intercept him before he could disappear for good. On a humid evening just before sunset, Jacob arrived at the Malaga airport in a rented black SUV. Dressed in a plain gray hoodie, dark sunglasses, and jeans, he tried to blend in. He avoided the main terminal, instead heading toward a private hangar reserved for exclusive charters. But plainclothes officers were already in place. Just as he approached the hangar's entrance with his forged documents in hand, he was surrounded by law enforcement. He didn't resist at first. He seemed dazed, almost robotic, as officers cuffed him and read him his rights. But inside the police van, he began to break down. Repeatedly, he claimed there had been a mistake, insisting that he was simply leaving for a business emergency, and that Isabella had left him and wasn't coming back. But the lies no longer mattered. Jacob Carter had officially transitioned from person of interest to primary suspect in a transnational murder investigation. At the station, a search of his belongings revealed the forged passport, 2 unregistered phones, $20,000 in cash, and a small flash drive containing encrypted financial documents. Investigators believed this was his exit kit, evidence that he never intended to return, and that he had likely prepared for this escape weeks, if not months, in advance. The timing of his attempted flight, right after new evidence surfaced, only made his guilt more apparent. News of Jacob's arrest spread quickly, both in Spain and across the United States. Media outlets flooded social media with images of his capture and detailed accounts of his lies, fraud, and now, flight attempt. The once celebrated businessman was now known around the world as the man who had tried to erase his wife and walk away as if nothing had happened. But justice had finally caught up to him. Following Jacob Carter's dramatic arrest at the Malaga airport, the investigation shifted into its final and most crucial phase, uncovering the full truth and delivering justice. With his attempt to flee foiled and the mountain of evidence growing by the day, Jacob was officially charged with the murder of Isabella Carter. He was held in a high-security Spanish prison while authorities coordinated with U.S. officials for his extradition. During this time, the FBI and Spanish police continued pressing him for answers, hoping to finally recover Isabella's body and bring closure to the case. Initially, Jacob maintained his innocence. He claimed again and again that Isabella had walked out on him and framed him to escape their marriage. But as investigators laid out every piece of evidence, digital traces, financial records, surveillance footage, and the items found in the suitcase, his facade started to erode. Faced with the possibility of a lifetime behind bars, Jacob made a decision that shocked everyone. He confessed. In a closed-door interview with federal and Spanish officials, Jacob admitted that he had killed Isabella the night of their final argument in the villa. According to his statement, she had threatened to leave him for good, and he feared that she would expose his financial schemes and destroy his public image. In a moment of rage, he claimed he had drugged her wine during dinner, waited until she was nearly unconscious, and then strangled her in their bedroom. He kept the body hidden in the garden shed for 2 days while he prepared the suitcase and mapped out a burial site. Late one night, he transported her body to a remote dry riverbed, buried it under rocks, and scattered personal items to mislead investigators. Using the details from his confession, authorities launched a final search operation. 2 days later, with Jacob's directions, they located Isabella's remains partially buried in the exact location he had described. Her body was carefully recovered and confirmed through dental records and DNA. The autopsy report aligned with Jacob's story. Traces of sedatives were found in her system, along with physical evidence of strangulation. The recovery of Isabella's body brought a mixture of heartbreak and relief to her family and friends. After weeks of unanswered questions, they finally had closure, though the pain of her loss would never fade. Her sister Elena traveled to Spain to bring her remains home, and later established the Isabella Carter Foundation, aimed at supporting women in controlling relationships and raising awareness about emotional abuse and domestic violence hidden behind wealth and glamour. Jacob Carter was extradited to the United States and stood trial in federal court. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent as the judge delivered the sentence, while Isabella's family held back tears. The case of Jacob and Isabella Carter became a global warning, a story of how appearances can deceive and how greed, control, and calculated cruelty can exist behind even the most perfect image.